down the hammer and pick up the pencil. You're about to listen to the Savvy Radio Show. Learn from real-life real estate investors, experience revealed with the Savvy Landlord as your host.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Savvy Radio Show. And one of my mentors, a man that I look up to, success. Just when you hear him, your ears just tune up and listen. Even boring subjects like IRA and self-directed 401ks, a checkbook, something, 10 to 15 years ago, I just yawned at that stuff. Now, 18 years later, I just get excited just to hear Bob's passion about this area, that he is intricate details and laws that are changing. And I mean, Bob, were you investing when there wasn't even a self-directed IRA? Because you said you've been investing for about 18 years, right, thus far. Was self-directed even happening?
Actually, I've been investing since 91, so that's more than 18 years. They really invented the Roth self-directed IRA probably in the late 90s, and that's about when I got started. So
that's awesome.
Using those. So I was doing this 6-7 years before that happened. So
fabulous. And that's why you're still use Quest as a custodial. That's a question I get all the time. People ask me, who's my custodial? And I use a no fee or one flat fee organization that I've had great success with because I don't do that many transactions. Tell me why you use Quest so much.
The big thing is when I call them, the person that I speak to is somebody who is able to engage me in intelligent conversation. And so if I say, hey, you guys did X, Y, Z, why'd you do that? They can give me a rational explanation. And then if they say something and I disagree with it and I explain why I do, they're not going to say, well, that's what our policy book says. They're going to give me a real answer, or maybe they'll even change their mind. And so just the people's attitude and their knowledge is so much better than with some other people I've worked with.
And I've heard and I've seen Quest, they're kind of the pioneers of the self-directed IRA. Is that true, or I need to really dig into that, but is that...
Well, it was actually Mid-Ohio Securities, which later become Equity Trust, was really the first pioneer. They're the ones that invented the whole space. And I had numerous accounts with them and still have some accounts with them. So awesome. And then, that wasn't even my conversation. I was just so excited about that. So let's just get to the gist of why I had you come back on the show is owner finance. I mentioned earlier on the last episode that there is a class action suit in Oklahoma City right now about predatory lending and owner finance, contract for deed. You've been doing this a long time. Can you shed some light? What is owner finance, owner carry, contract for deed? Define those tools and why you like it, and let's just chat about that. Well, so I started life as a landlord, and that, that's a technique and a strategy that works really well. The fundamental issue is that as a landlord, no matter how hard you try, there's always a significant portion of your tenants that just hate you, or that no matter how hard you're working, they're just not happy with what's going on. And so I got real into owner financing probably around the time the financial crisis hit, because there was a tax credit that made that really advantageous for a lot of people. And then I sort of got more and more into that. And what I discovered was that when I sell a house with owner financing, I have a whole lot less responsibility. I'm not responsible for the roof leaking or the furnace blowing up or all those numerous things that happen as a landlord. And then the other thing that happens is the people stay around a lot longer. And so I'm turning houses over less often. And the people are a lot happier for me. So I have people that I'm doing less work for, spending less money on, that are much happier because I'm giving them a chance to own the house. Now, the big thing with owner finance transactions is that you need to make sure that it is reasonably advantageous for the other party too. just because this is a transaction that you're going to be involved in for numerous years. And so it's important that you give them a fair deal.
So is there like checks and balances? Is there a specific interest rate or specific terms that you offer? How does to make it advantageous? Because if someone's willing to pay 15% for hard money, but some people think that's ludicrous, how do you apply that same principle for owner finance?
So the big thing that I do with owner financing is that I make sure I get a really good deal when I buy the house. And then I pass at least some of that on to the person I'm selling it to. And then I'm typically charging 8% interest, and I typically will do a 15-year fully amortized, in Ohio we do land contracts. So by doing that, I'm not putting balloons in my contracts. So I used to do a lot of lease options, and what I found is that, the people would come in all excited, and the thought was they were going to get their credit cleaned up and refinance in 2 years. Well, more often than not, that didn't happen, and so then I have these people that are frustrated that they don't end up owning the house. So by making it a 15-year fully amortized land contract, all they have to do to own that house is pay me for 15 years. Now, from my perspective, if I could put somebody in a house and have them send me checks for the next 15 years, that's great by me. Amen. And now, if they have the ability to get their credit cleaned up and get whatever issues they have solved, then they can get refinanced. And then they can get, a 4, 5, 6% interest rate. But they always have that safety valve of they could just continue to pay me, and it's not a big deal.
So are these assets that you're selling on owner finance, are they debt-free, or do you do a wraparound mortgage with them?
By and large, they're debt-free. So, with a lot of the stuff I sell on owner financing, I'm typically generating a 20, 25, 30, 35% internal rate of return. If you can begin to learn a little bit about compound interest, if you could generate those high rates of return, you really don't need borrowed money to become very wealthy very quickly.
So tell me, what's a typical purchase and what's your typical sell price?
So I just closed on a house here that I paid $8,000 for. Now, now the interesting thing about this transaction was there were about $5,000 worth of back taxes. The seller gets I gave the seller $1,000, and then there were about $2,000 worth of certified judgments. So what I did is I bought the property subject to the certified judgments and the back taxes. So, up front, I'm out of pocket $1,000. Then the back taxes with my local county here, once you own the property, if you go to them, they'll let you pay those taxes over the next 3 years. So I set up an installment plan with the county to pay the taxes over the next 3 years. So essentially the county's financing those taxes for me. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to just let the certified judgment sit because there's no margin for me in paying those off because they bear interest at 4% a year. So worst case is I'm going to have to pay them off 5-6 years from now. But there's a significant chance that those CJs will expire before I have to pay them off. So I might end up buying that house for $6,000 rather than $8,000. And then the people that were in the house, know how to do work, and the house was pretty beat up, and they were paying the guy that I was buying the house from $600 a month. So what I said to him is, hey, how about if you guys can buy the house, you pay me $395 a month, which is going to include taxes and insurance for the next 15 years, and then it's yours. They thought that was fantastic because they really wanted to work on fixing the house up, and they have the skills to do that, but they didn't want to fix up somebody else's house.
Right.
And then at the same time, they're paying $200 a month less than they were in rent, so they can use that money to buy materials to fix the house up, and they can supply their own labor. So it really works really well for everybody.
And so you sell it at a price point of the monthly payment. What's the overall, what you'll receive for that situation? Where, I mean, is it a dollar figure like you sold it for $25,000, or I mean, it sounds like a $35,000 loan.
Well, because I include taxes and insurance, it's probably the sale price is more like $30,000.
Okay.
But it still works well for everybody, and that's a house that has a tax value now of $40,000. So I'm actually selling it to them for $10,000 less than the tax value.
What's your exposure like on defaults, or it can go awry, they burn it down? Do you have them have insurance? What's your exposure, and how do you protect yourself?
Well, so number one, there's going to there's insurance on the building. So if they burn the house down, the insurance company pays off the loan. We all end up fine. If they stop paying, in Ohio, we have a real good land contract law where if somebody who buys a house on a land contract, if they have been in the house less than 5 years and have paid less than 20% of the purchase price, you give them a 30-day notice, and from there it's a regular eviction. So it's relatively inexpensive to get them out. Now, I also do some deals in Kentucky, and what I'll typically do there is do a lease option until I've seen that they've paid for a couple of years on time, and then they actually have the option to convert that to a land contract automatically once they've had 12, 18, or 24 on-time payments.
How do you handle the escrow? Do you handle that yourself, or how do you handle that, the taxes and insurance?
Yeah, so all my properties, we escrow for the taxes and insurance, just because you want to make sure that those get paid and that they don't get behind.
Do you pay for that insurance in their name, or do you pay for it in your name and add them as insuree?
So it's a master policy that I have that I add them as an additional insured.
Okay, for that
it ends up being a lot. Yeah, it ends up being a lot less expensive for them that way, because
except for
I'm typically correct, and so they have the option of going and getting their own policy, or they have so they can go get their own homeowner's policy. They can also take my policy and then add a renter's insurance policy, even though they're not really renters. And even when they do that, it ends up being less expensive for them just because I'm paying $30, $40 a month for insurance, whereas if they don't have very good credit, they might be paying $90, $100, $110 a month for insurance.
And so two things here. One, you're treating it like a rental property on your portfolio for the insurance purposes. It's like a bank policy in essence. And then on their side, they can read both sides. They can get a higher content insurance as a renter, and then they have the safety net of if it does burn down from your insurance. Is that right?
Yeah, but they always have the option to go and get their own insurance policy if they would rather do it that way. It's just I have this set up. If they don't, then this is what I do. So these low numbers. Now, you can't be rich overnight, making $200 a month. I mean, obviously, you have to do this in a volume business aspect. Do you do this on a larger scale, like a $100,000 house or a bigger property? I do this from probably, the $4,000 or $5,000 houses up to maybe $30,000, $40,000 would be my purchase price. What happens is you move up the price scale, it becomes harder to get as high of a margin. So you end up getting a lower internal rate of return. And so it's a function of, it's nicer to have fewer assets where they're paying you more each month, but you end up with a better return if you have more assets where they're paying you less each month. So it's a balancing act that way.
Okay. What things could go awry, and how, did you spend a lot of time on the paperwork? Because like in Oklahoma, some people get confused. There's a contract for deed. There's a lease option. there's a true owner finance. And I love what you said. I don't know if it was this episode or the other episode that you said that you just do no balloon in there. Let's just answer that question first. What made you decide to do the balloon? Is that just to protect you and not be predatory?
Well, there are a couple of things. When Dodd-Frank passed, there are really some pretty severe limitations on to whether you can put a balloon in a land contract and still be in compliance with the law. But even beyond that, even if you can figure out a way to get around that, if that's what you want to do, I think it's better off for you and for them. And so it's going back to what I'm saying before is that, hey, you need to make sure these transactions work for everybody and not just for you. Because you can drop a real fancy contract and get somebody to sign it that's good for you isn't a good thing to do. You need to enter into a transaction that's going to be good for them too. And so if you think there's a significant chance they're not going to be able to refinance a couple of years from now, it's a lousy deal for you to put a balloon in. But then from your perspective, even if you kick them out and they move out voluntarily and you don't have any legal problems, well, then you have to resell the house again. So I'd rather just have people keep sending me payments every month.
And it's manageable.
Yeah. And so the way the law works is basically if you're going to do one of these a year, you need to be a little careful, but not that careful. If you're doing 2 or 3, you have a little bit higher standard of care. If you're going to do more than 3 of these in a year, then they need to be originated by a licensed mortgage loan originator. And you need to generate the right paperwork to do that.
And is that what you had that in your wheelhouse? Is that your team?
Absolutely. One of the things that I did, I was frustrated by the fact that I couldn't do many of these deals. And so I finally figured out a way I have somebody that works for me that is a licensed mortgage loan originator, and we're just real careful about the paperwork and that we do it all. And, some of the things you're required to do is you need to make sure that they have enough income to be able to afford to make the payment. Well, if I'm selling somebody a house, I want them to be able to pay me anyhow. So that's not that much of a hardship. And then the other paperwork ends up being a mail merge that's really just not that big of a deal to do once you have it set up.
Right. What's the bad side of this? Like you sell a house to someone and they trashed it and you're screwed. Does that happen often?
Well, so with these houses, I typically buy them. I typically will fix the mechanical systems, but I typically don't fix the cosmetics. But then I sell them at a monthly payment that's a couple $100 a month less than they would be paying in rent. So, the downside is I sell the house, they pay me for 18 months, they default, I have to kick them out and I get the house back. Well, I feel like I'm in better shape than I would have been if I did a real nice job fixing that house up front, because they tend not to ruin the furnace and the electrical wiring. What they tend to do is mess up the paint job. Well, if I didn't spend any money painting it to start with and put new carpet down, that doesn't hurt me so much. And then I get to resell the house, for basically I get to collect the same chunk of payments again. So I'd rather have somebody pay me, but if they don't, that's unfortunate and that's a pain in the neck. It doesn't end up hurting me financially that much in the long run, but it's more of a hassle factor.
Right. So what's the percentage? I'm assuming you're a statistical guy. You're an engineer mind. You love economy or economics as a degree. Is there a hard number? I know you have a lower 35,000 and below frame, I guess, business frame. What's a statistic or a stat, or even if you have one, or if you have to guess, how many do go in default?
So typically what I find in the first couple of years, probably 20% of them will not work out. But typically once they're there for a couple of years, they tend to be there for a very long time.
Cool. So and you said this several times, you said 18 months. Is that kind of like a dew point for you, if that's kind of where it's either going to go awry, or it's going to go the distance? Is that a good, safe gauge?
Yeah, 18 to 20. Once they've been there 18 to 24 months, they tend to just be there for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 years.
And so, good. Sorry. And
so it's just, and the other interesting thing, when I first started doing this, I'm thinking the nicer houses that are more expensive, I'm going to have a lower default rate on than I am in the low income houses. And I find that not to be the case. And it really, really surprised me. But just with so many of these low income people, they are so excited to have the chance to own a house. They're excited to have somebody who's giving them a fair shake and treating them reasonably and treating them fairly, and not having to be underneath a landlord anymore. But they just tend to stay put and are happy to pay, and they pay very consistently because it's the payment they can actually afford.
I used to have about 70% of my portfolio used to be low income, and then I have probably 10% or maybe 8% that's high end, and they're both the same demanding behaviors, and there's no difference, I think. I mean, they're both paycheck to paycheck. They both have these crazy expectations, and just one has more zeros. And I think it's safer. In low income rentals, that's very frustrating for me, and that's not a business that I'm good at. But the low income owner finance works really well for me. Just because in the low income rentals, I end up having a lot of maintenance costs, and people are pretty helpless. And whereas with owner finance, they really sort of seem to take charge and do a lot better job. Yeah, absolutely. Great business model. I need to think into that. Okay. So I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the episode that, in Oklahoma, there's a class action suit that's been going on for about a year. I've been trying to follow it. I just, time is everything. But here's a couple of things that I've heard, that this investor was charging 12%. This investor was taking escrow, but not paying the property taxes on the escrow, and the insurance wasn't in place. And they also had bank loans on all those properties. And this is in the tune of about 40 units, this investor, 40 properties that they sold. Is this going to affect us as real estate investors and out of those 40 homes, and of course this is all through the grapevine, so this is not perfect data here, but they're all Hispanic. And what happened was that this investor's tenant buyer house burnt down, didn't have insurance on it. It became a problem. They hired an attorney. The attorney did some digging, found that this is 12% was ludicrous, usury, and it just blew up. And then they actually filed a motion. They have a motion against this investor just for that one transaction, and then they have a pending class action suit. My fear in this happening, because I have some contract for deeds, I have some random instruments that I've used in the past that I've just continued to refine and change, make better every time I learn things. Like I'm going to take out that balloon payment that I have in there right now in 5 years. Do you think this is going to affect us as investors in general?
Well, the question is whether sort of the bad apple spoils it from a legislative perspective for everybody else. And so is this one bad apple going to cause your city council or county commissioners or whatnot to pass a law that's going to make it impossible for the people that are doing business the right way and actually helping people out to do business? And that was some of what happened with Dodd-Frank and the SAFE Act, was that sort of they threw the baby out with the bathwater. And so so my hope is that won't happen. And just, the type of things you're talking about, I mean, that person shouldn't be doing that type of stuff. You shouldn't be doing those things. If you're collecting money for taxes and insurance, yeah, you need to be paying for that. That's just common sense. You need to be nice to people. You need to give them a fair deal. The best asset protection in the world is just being nice to people and trying to treat them fairly. And, sure, there are people that are going to be upset with you now and then, but if you made a mistake, own up to it and deal with it. Don't try and run from it. So, it's just, sometimes common sense isn't that common anymore for whatever reason.
Just to jump on what you said, the best asset protection is being nice. I agree with that, but I want to add one more thing. Having insurance is the next best thing as well for asset protection.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Absolutely.
Bob, it's always a pleasure. I just can't get enough of your time. I'm looking forward to hanging out for all weekend, coming in Friday, leaving on Monday, and hanging out with us in Oklahoma City, April 20th and 21st, an investor weekend. Give us one more teaser. What's one thing else that you're going to be on stage for an hour and a half? I don't know if you can handle that, but
it's pretty shocking. I'm not so good at talking to myself, but hopefully we'll have lots of questions and answers. And
that's a good idea.
People with some of their.
I mean, I looked down that we've been on this conversation for 20 minutes, and I'm like, man, I got like 100 more questions. But I was like, man, people can't listen beyond 20 minutes. Give me one more teaser. What's another thing you're going to talk about in April?
So I'm going to absolutely be talking about how I do some of my seller financing stuff and show you how you can generate, 20, 25, 30% internal rate of returns, even with low dollar self-directed IRA accounts, that you can end up keeping that money tax-free forever.
That's awesome. Well, man, I can't wait to see you. It's like less than 30 days, and we'll have a great time. Appreciate your time today, Bob.
Okay, take care.
Investor Weekend is not far off, with over 10 information sessions to increase your portfolio. Log on to www.investorweekend.com. Whether you are a seasoned investor or never purchased a property before, you don't want to miss the Investor Weekend. Join us for a powerful, knowledge-packed weekend with over 10 informational sessions that are bound to enlarge your real estate investments. You will hear from the best national and local real estate investors that will share practical and relevant experiences with you, the investor. There will be several networking sessions to connect with other like-minded people for potential funding, partnerships, and yes, hot deals. Go to www.investorweekend.com. Did you know we meet once a month for the Landlord Lunch Meeting? The third Wednesday of every month. Go to landlordlunch.com.
Thanks for listening to the Savvy Radio Show. Glide online and listen to our other motivating episodes at savvyradioshow.com. Connect on Twitter at LandlordBook and always be buying assets.